umutla başladık, ellerde güç var. Milli hamlelerle gelecekte biz varız. Her adımda, her kademede bir iz var. Başarının ardında hep insan var.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. And just to clarify, I'm actually dialing in from Scotland. So it's still dark and very cold. Lovely to be here with you all today. And what I wanted to start to explore was, why would we even want to talk about agile leadership in the world today? And today is the 15th of January, and it's looking very likely that the year ahead is going to be full of uncertainty. The world of work has forever changed with the new geopolitical situation, the acceleration of digitalization and AI and tech, and of course, the impact of things such as the climate emergency. All of this is meaning we are facing a level of uncertainty that I'm not sure human civilization has actually ever faced before. It's a real different level, and I actually even call it fundamental uncertainty. And fundamental uncertainty means that in the past, we perhaps talked about change in a way where, it happens, we need to be resilient, but if we work a bit harder, if we wait a bit longer, things will go back to being stable, things will go back to being normal. Fundamental uncertainty means that any plan, any strategy that you create, you need to be ready for it to change in some way, because a change is going to happen, maybe even tomorrow, maybe even by the end of today, and you don't know what that is yet. Yes, you can predict, but you'll never be able to fully estimate what that change is. And this means you need to be ready to make decisions in an environment where you don't have all the information. And that's not because you don't have all the data. You have all the data in hand. It's just that there's going to be a change. And this means that the way that you lead your teams, the way that you build strategy, the way that you plan needs to have this ability to adapt, respond, and continue to evolve as the world of work evolves around you. The chart on the screen at the moment is actually the World Uncertainty Index, and this tracks economic reports from governments around the world and when governments talk about uncertainty. And as you can see, we got to June last year and we're literally off the charts with how much uncertainty there is in our environment. And this is what we've got to be really conscious of as we lead our teams into 2026. How do you build an environment that you can lead them through change, that they feel able to bend and stretch, but continuously come back together again to really move towards the vision that you have in your strategy? The survey that I've just put up on the screen was taken last year, and it'll be really interesting because it comes out every year. So it comes out quite soon from PwC. And as you can see, last year, CEOs across the world, nearly half of CEOs believed that if they don't evolve their organization, they won't be economically viable in 10 years' time. And over 60% were reinventing a significant part of their operations. And I'm sure you really relate to that. Everyone is looking, how do we incorporate AI into the system? How do we evolve our productions? How do we adapt and change for the market around us? What do our customers now need? And in all of this, you need to lead your people. And that's why we thought it was really important today to look at, what does it mean to be an agile leader? And first and foremost, what I'd like you to kind of, always come back to is that agility is about solving complex problems. And the world today feels like a really big, complex problem. And complex problems are different. They're multi-layered. There's no one way to solve these problems. And actually, by just doing one thing, one change, you often start to alter the problem itself. They're multifaceted. And actually, the only way that you can begin to sort of solve a complex problem is to test, is to work empirically. So that's what I want to look at today, is how do you start to bring in this mindset, these ways of working into your leadership? And what does that mean for your teams and your organization? So I'm Natal Dank. It's lovely to meet you. And you've probably guessed, though I'm dialing in from Scotland, I'm not Scottish. I'm actually an Australian that lives in Scotland for the weather because it's always so much darker and colder over here at this time of year. But I have written several books over the last few years around using business agility, particularly in the world of HR, learning and development, and people management. And it's amazing to be here at the Talent Summit because I believe that the skills of your people, the skills of your organization, and the competencies that you're looking at this summit really are the key to solving a lot of these complex problems that we have faced around us. Really understanding the human in the AI loop, understanding the human way of differentiating our organization from others is really going to be how you can adapt and respond to this market that we find ourselves in. So today I'm going to talk about several topics that sit in Agile leadership. It's quite a big topic, so I had to think about what would be the most useful for you to learn about today. So I just want to start with some core elements of business agility just to ensure that we're all comfortable with some of the core definitions. Some of you will be familiar with this. I think I have quite a few engineers in the room, and I expect many of you will be comfortable with some of the basics of Agile ways of working and already apply that in your day-to-day. Then we'll move into more some of the themes around Agile leadership. We're going to look at Agile mindset, and this is talked about a lot, but I want to kind of delve into some of the core beliefs that sit there that really will help you as a leader going forward in 2026. And then we're going to look at 3 principles. So principle 1 is product value, and principle 2 is experimentation, and principle 3 relates a lot to what you're looking at this conference today, which is all about multi-skilled ways of working. And I call it T-shape, and that is a term that comes from agility. And I think it's going to be really helpful for you to think about competencies in a different way and how to lead your team to solve these complex problems that we're facing. So let's get into it. Why would you even consider working in a more agile way? Well, agility is all about delivering value. And we're going to look at that a lot in this session. And as organizations bring in agility, they're really trying to deliver that value and ultimately their projects at a faster pace. But you don't do that just by working faster or harder. You do that by ruthless prioritization. So agility is all about understanding what is the most valuable thing to work on right now to deliver the value that's the most important to your customer, to your environment. And so we'll talk a bit about how that always comes back to solving the problem at hand. It also helps you deliver faster by reducing waste. So if you consciously prioritizing what to work on, then you're reducing the waste that you don't need to work on. And it sounds simple, but actually we work on a lot of things that aren't the most useful thing. They're sort of assumed, or they're what sort of, is easy to get done first, or it's where our skills lie, but it might not always be the most valuable thing to do. And so this is all about constantly reprioritizing, adapting the plan, and understanding what is the most important thing to do today and now versus tomorrow or yesterday. So that helps you manage priorities. And that's what this is all about. Working in more traditional ways, which we'll talk about, such as waterfall, is not wrong. It's just that in a complex world, you need a better way of managing the risk around uncertainty and change. And agility gives you that. It also helps you reduce task switching. And this is one of the biggest issues I know all the people that I'm working with are facing. How do you stay on track, work on one thing, get it done, and move on to the next one? Our world is full of overwhelm from digitalization, social media, competing priorities. So it's really hard to actually deliver a project and get it done to then move on to the next one. And so if you can be more hyper-focused, there is evidence to show that agile teams can deliver or be more productive by 25%. And this is exactly what we're after. Also, it helps break down functional or skill silos, which I know is really important to this conversation today. So just for everyone that's newer to this topic, Agile kind of started as a way of working in software development over 20 years ago. But now it's really evolved into much more of an organizational approach and a leadership approach. So it's less about some of the tools that you might have heard, such as Scrum and Kanban, and it's much more about building an organization that can bend and stretch and come back together again. But just so you understand the kind of the background is that it started 20 years ago when the world of work evolved back then. If you think about it, it was the introduction of phones, it was the start of the internet, and the world started to globalize. Software developers found that if they worked in a more traditional waterfall way, where you plan everything up front and then the plan cascades down the Gantt chart, which is where the waterfall term comes from, that if something changed as you're delivering the project, if your dependencies altered, the budget changed, you needed to hand over to the next person and next person, you started to lose knowledge, you started to slow down, that actually the risk just kept increasing. So waterfall is still a really good way of working if you think your plan can hold for the whole time that you run that project. Because everything gets planned up front, then you systematically work through that plan and you deliver everything at the end. Yes, you may do some testing, you may validate things, but ultimately it's big bang, one size fits all at the end. Now that's fine if you think everything's going to hold. But in the world that we now work, we know that something could change as of tomorrow. So the more complex a project is, the more dependencies that you have, the fact that your budget could change tomorrow based on announcements of geopolitical situations, you need to be able to manage that risk differently. And this is what agility is all about. So you break that same plan, that same budget, that same vision down into more achievable, value-led cycles of work. And that's what you see now on your left, my right-hand side of the screen. So what we do is we say, okay, here's everything that we think we need to do in this project, but let's think about what would we do first and why? Is it a proof of concept? Do we need to experiment and get some more data? Do we actually need to create a prototype and test that? I know a lot of you would probably work with some of these concepts already. We try and do that within a couple of weeks or a month, and then we test it. We get data. Your whole kind of digital environment is built this way. How do we make sure that we get a prototype out, get people using it, understand how people engage with it, and then use that data to drive the next piece of work? This is what we're seeing in the AI industry right now. Some of the crucial elements is that by understanding what works for your client, then you can decide what you do in the next cycle. Also, if you experiment and it fails, then you fail quickly and you've learned so much of what to now work on. So you quickly start to validate the most important thing to do next versus something that might now be wasteful. And you return to that backlog and you decide, do I keep going? Do I adapt my plan? Do I change direction? Or actually it validates the plan that we already have. And this means you can adapt. So at the end of each cycle, you can bring in change. And if you're doing that every 2 weeks or every month, then this means you can adapt to the uncertainty around us. So agility at its heart is this delivering value early and often. So how do we get value out? How do we make sure that we're actually delivering something that the customer can engage in? And then use the feedback, the data that we're collecting in that cycle of work to then plan, do, review, and adapt. And that's the cycle. And what I'm finding with teams that I work with is that in this environment of constant change, that consistency of plan, do, review, adapt gives them some discipline. It actually helps them feel like they're moving forward. So at the end of every cycle, they review the work, they look at what they did do, they achieve something. And yes, they may now need to change the plan, but they feel like they've got that progression. And that is key, I've realized, in this world of fundamental uncertainty. The other key thing, if I take you back, is that if you work in a waterfall way and you have to stop your project halfway through, you haven't delivered anything. You've done a lot of work, but nothing has been delivered. If your project stops halfway and you're using Agile, you've actually delivered value every cycle. And this means you've changed the complex environment. It means you've moved forward in some way. And that is key to how we start to build these more agile organizations that we need in today's world. I also thought I'd just share the Agile Manifesto, which was written back 20 years ago when software developers started to use these different tools. And it still is really relevant today. But as I said, a lot of the tools are starting to change, and it's much more about mindset and organizational culture that we're looking at today. But the manifesto, I'm sure a lot of you will relate to. And actually, I use this with the HR and L&D teams that I work with. And I create a kind of employee experience version. But it's ultimately individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So we need to create the right environment. We need human connection to ensure that we can get the right result and then understand the right tools and processes to use. We need to get something working. So working software, working product, working employee experience before we write the documentation to support it. And this is a big one. There's no use having policy unless we know what we're trying to decide and do the policy for. Then collaborating with our customer. And that's internally as well as externally, having a relationship and understanding what they need, what is value for them, instead of just negotiating terms. And then finally, responding to change over following a plan. Now, the thing about the manifesto, why I still think it's really important to share, is that it's not an either or. It's actually like two sides of a coin. So the rules on the right are things that are still really important. It is still really important to build a plan. But unless that plan can change, you're not going to survive very long in this world of uncertainty. And that's what it's all about, making sure that the things on the left are possible, and you actually can bring that into the strategy that you're building. So that's some of the core elements of agility and what sits behind a lot of these sort of, there's numerous books, movements. Some of you may have experienced a lot of agile ways of working in your organization. But I think it's really interesting that I was asked to talk about agile leadership today, because this is about mindset. This is about how you build a team that can actually achieve these outcomes, that can work in this more collaborative, multi-skilled, value-driven way. So let's think more about the mindset that sits behind that first, and then we'll explore three key principles. So mindset is a really interesting thing. You'll hear about this all the time. So, agile is a mindset. It's not a tool or a process. But it can be really hard to explain because, as you all know, mindset is something that happens for ourselves in our own brain. It often needs a sort of an aha moment. But there's three core beliefs that sit under the mindset that I wanted to share with you today because I think it's crucial to being a leader in today's world. What you have before is a diagram by Simon Powers, who wrote a fantastic book around agility. And this shows you that there's layers to what we're trying to achieve in an organization, that a lot of people see tools and processes and practices such as Scrum and Kanban representing agility. But actually, that's just ways to make things happen. And what really sits underneath it are values, principles, and of course, mindset. But once we get into that mindset, it's much less intangible. But it actually has some core beliefs that don't really evolve. They actually are very stable. And that's what I want to keep bringing us back to. So there's three key beliefs that sit under the mindset of agility. The first is that we believe that we live in a complex world. And that might seem obvious in 2026, but a lot of us don't act that way. We often want to still control. We want to have KPIs. We want to have detailed plans. We want to know exactly and predict exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. But actually, we can't. And so we need to start to accept that the way that we work is to embrace this uncertainty, get creative choice through it. That's a very different way to lead your team. The next one is people belief. And I think this is becoming even more relevant as we start to see AI come into the organization. The third is this proactivity, this movement forward that agility gives us. So I'm just going to quickly dive into each one because I think it's really central to being an agile leader. So the first one is the belief that we live in a complex world. And I used to always talk about COVID and the pandemic as a good example of a world that's very complex. But I really feel that 2025 and what we've already experienced in 2026 is doing very well in showing the uncertainty that we now live and work in. It used to be that it was considered that you could predict what would happen economically maybe 6 months out to a year. It's now considered that it's actually almost impossible to truly predict what will happen in 3 months' time. Yes, we can make plans, we can estimate, but there is so much change, so many unknowns, so many things that we can't predict that is going to change the way that we interact. This means that the only way that you can move forward with data-driven decisions is to experiment and gather the empirical evidence that's necessary to make those choices. As I said, complex problems can be solved in multiple ways. You're talking about talent. How do you build the right talent? How do you source the right talent? What are the skills that you need to get the next project delivered? How do you develop those skills at pace? If you can't, then how do you source them in? And now, which skills do you actually give over to AI? And what does that look like to have humans and AI working together? These are all huge questions that actually there'll be multiple ways to solve them. And you need to use a kind of a process to understand where to start, what to do next, and how to move forward. Next is the people belief. For me, this is central to agile leadership. This is the belief that if we build a team that can collaborate together and share their skills and learn with each other, then we can actually solve these complex problems. And I really feel like we need to keep coming back to this one because this is central to the debate at the moment of AI replacing humans at work. It's becoming more and more clear that unless you have a human in the loop that can check the work and validate, because AI is probabilistic, then you're missing the process is not going to improve. So only by enhancing situations with tech, enhancing the human element, can we really see the results that we need. So this is a big call out to every leader in this room. This is about managing the system, the organization, the kind of infrastructure of your organization, not the people themselves. Build the system where the people can flourish and let them do great work. Then the final one is proactivity. So agility is all well and good, but you need this element of constantly moving forward. So you can think that you're in a complex world, you can believe in the people, but how do you keep going forward? And this is the agile cycle. It's the belief that if you do review and check and understand what worked and what didn't, understand how to learn from failure and use that improvement, those learnings to drive the next cycle, then actually you will keep moving forward. So this is central to the belief. This is continuous improvement. And again, this is not about making all the right decisions as a leader. This is about creating the right conditions where the good decisions can come through your team, through your people, through the competencies that you're exploring at this summit. So that's the 3 core beliefs that sit underneath agile leadership. And I really think that's central to a lot of your discussions that you're having at this conference over the last 2 days. Now, what we'll do is we'll just deep dive into 3 core principles. And I chose these principles because they bring to life agility, but I believe that they're probably the 3 most important ones going forward in 2026 as an agile leader. The first is value, the second is experimentation, and the third is what I call T-shaped skills. So value sits at the heart of agility, because if you think about those cycles that we were talking about, the only way to prioritize work, make decisions, is to understand the value that you're delivering. How do we understand value? We understand value through solving problems. So a product delivers value by solving a problem for a group of people or recognizing a job to be done. So for example, I, buy this phone and I want to be able to do things with it. I want to be able to contact people. I want to be able to read my emails. I want to lose my life on social media. The pictures on the screen are people that are using the head torch for different reasons. They're caving, they're running in the dark, they're walking their dog. Each person has purchased that product because they need to do something with it. They need to solve a problem. This is crucial to understanding how you build value in your organization, not just through products that your organization might be creating, but even the employee experience of the organization. So value is the commercial reality of why you do things. Everything should be based on value, even your business as usual and your operations. Every decision, why should we do this before another thing? It needs to be based on value, not just capacity, time available, or skills that you've got. And because this is crucial to prioritization. We constantly talk about the need to prioritize. In this digital world, you cannot do it all. So you need a system to prioritize, and this gives you the language. I also wanted to just call out for all my HR and L&D folk and professionals in the audience today is that this same concept can even go into the employee experience. So if you see the employee experience as a product, yes, made up of different component parts, onboarding, attraction, team development, performance, but all of it together is a product. And your product has to deliver value. It has to be seen as valuable to the employees. They need to want to subscribe. They want to come back. They need to give their best work. And then you, in turn, need to deliver value that's going to be good for the organization. So a really good example is onboarding. That is a problem to solve, a job to be done. People start in a new role, or they may be new to the organization. They want to be able to contribute from day one. They need to feel connected. They need good tech. They need to understand what are their goals, what are their objectives. But then the organization needs to see that return on investment. They want to know that they'll hit the ground running, they'll contribute to their team. So by solving these problems, we can build a really great onboarding. It's not just a process, it's actually a product that's delivering value. And this is how you start to bring that concept into the way that you work. So that's principle one. Principle two is experimentation. And I think this is probably becoming quite clear now, is that the only way to gather data in a complex environment is to quickly test. Proof of concept, understand your hypothesis. Why would this change, would this action alter the situation that you're facing? What do you think will happen, and how can you collect the data to demonstrate that that is correct or not? And remember, an experiment is really different to a pilot. By the time you're releasing a pilot, you have invested a lot of work. You usually signed a tender form. And actually, it's going to be hard to fail. There's already a lot of work, a lot of ego that's already gone into whatever you've created. An experiment is that you can fail. That actually, if this does not work, you can stop tomorrow and you can go into a different direction. And this is essential to complexity. An experiment could be as simple as, drawing through examples of your prototype and showing that to people in the organization, showing that to customers. An experiment could be a 3-month test in how to build a new solution. Just a quick case study on that I thought would be useful for this audience was an organization that experimented on how to design a new management development. So they had a series of leaders that really needed to evolve and build their skills, but no one had time to attend a 2-day program. So the team decided to just go and spend time with the managers. What was going on? What did they need? And actually, they found that managers talked about problems to solve. They said, I need to hire someone tomorrow. I want to make sure it's really great. They're really great, that they'll fit the team. How do I do that? I've got this difficult conversation. I need to do it tomorrow. I'm not sure how to go about it. So what they started to build was much more on-demand ways of the managers solving those problems. So What if they watched a video? What if they talked to a coach? What if they could come quickly to a 90-minute session? How could they access learning and information at the time that they saw that they had the problem? And this was a very different way of doing learning to, I'm going to go and do a 2-day program and learn all these different things about being a manager. So they prototyped and test solutions based on the problem to solve. They tried to use the language that managers used. And over time, they built up a new digital ecosystem of how to do management development at the organization. It's a really great example of actually coming at a problem in a whole new way, experimenting and testing to build the solution over time, as opposed to one size fits all. And then the final principle I'd like to leave you with today is working in a more T-shaped way. And I really feel this is going to be a key one for your discussions at this organization. Some of you may have heard this term of T-shape, but ultimately, to deliver value in Agile, you need all the skills to get the job done. So you need to understand how to work in a much more multi-skilled, multidisciplined way. Because if you've got to wait for another team or another handover, it just slows you down. You need to actually be able to respond and adapt directly to that customer in the now. And to do that, we need to think about skills. And it can't just be specialist skills or general skills. We actually need to think about how you combine the two. And that's what T-shape is all about. So the T-shape is looking at what I call the full stack. So the vertical is specialisms. Most people have one or a few deep specialisms that they've built up over time that reflects their experience, what they've studied, what they're really proud of. They're a thought leader in this area. But then a lot of people have general skills, and that's the horizontal. These are the skills that we're good and we're capable at. We're not the expert, but we actually need them to be good at what we do. So with T-shape, it's about how do you combine the two to be really effective. And in agility, this gives you more depth and breadth, not just as a person, but definitely as a team. So here's an example of a T-shape for someone that works more in learning and development or HR. Now, remember, the vertical is the specialism. So this is somebody that is a specialist in organizational design and talent. But let's think about the general capabilities they need to be good in their role and maybe what's useful for 2026. So things like people analytics, they've got to be able to understand data, read a report. They might not be a data scientist, but they really need capability in that space. Change management, agile ways of working. How do the two combine to create someone that has got much more flex and adaptability? Here's an example for an engineer. So again, remember the specialisms are the vertical. So this person, can go deep in software testing, can look at programming languages. But again, if an engineer can only do that, then they're going to be a bit, stuck in a silo. And great engineer can also have strategic thinking, project management. They're not going to be the expert, but they need these good, capable skills to start to develop. And this is exactly how we start to bring in AI. Most people cannot be a specialist in AI yet, but they can definitely start to bring it in as a general capability to really enhance their T-shape. 2 key points around this. One is that it allows you to be more productive. Because if you need to work based on value, you have your backlog that is prioritized based on value. You need to make sure that you do the first one, the second one, the third one based on that value. If you've got a team of specialists, you're stuck. You've got to wait for when that skill is available. If you have a T-shaped team, you can spread that backlog around. You can work so much more effectively, and ultimately you're much more future fit for going forward. You also can create so much more cross-training and depth in your team. So it's a really powerful way to think about how do you build this multi-skilled approach to deliver value at pace. So I'll just leave you with an example of what maybe a T-shaped engineering team could look like. Again, yours might be a bit different, but if you think about it, what's the general capabilities that everyone needs in this team to be effective? So I chose agile ways of working, commercial awareness, critical thinking. But then you need some key specialisms. So you might have data engineering might be a strong specialism, as well as data analytics and architecture. You might have a bit less around decision strategies or advanced data capabilities, and these might be areas that you now need to strengthen or grow. You might even have a gap. So if you were to map your T-shape for your team, what skills do you already have? What do you now need to develop? And this for me is key. It gives you the infrastructure to drive that, that proactivity and solve those complex problems at pace. So thank you very much. That was a kind of quick look at Agile leadership in the world of 2026. It is going to be a wild ride. But what I've started to realize is that uncertainty gives you choice. It gives you creative choice. And you can lean into that uncertainty and actually through that be even more sort of anti-fragile, where you find opportunity, you find new solutions through the uncertainty that is there. If you'd like to connect with me, this is my LinkedIn profile. I'd love to be connected. I'm always happy to chat around agility, solving problems. Some of you might know me from my profile, and it's been great to be here with you today. Thank you very much.